Hi, everyone. I just finished The Journey of God, Christianity in Six Movements, which is a brand new book by JD Lyonhart, published by IVP. Thank you, IVP, for sending me this for review. This is my honest reaction to the book. I'll take you through my format of talking about a little bit about who the author is and my experience with this writer and author and thinker, and then I'll step through the main idea of this book, comment on the research behind it, the readability of its style, and then my general reactions as a whole to the whole thing. So if you want to just jump to my reaction thoughts, go to the end. I'll have that time stamped at the bottom there. But let's dive into this one. I'm excited to talk about this. So JD Lyonhart, I've actually interviewed him on the channel several years ago. We talked about his earlier book, which I absolutely loved, called Monotheism. I thought that book was really funny, really creative, and very well versed in the philosophical arguments that it was pulling at. So I was really impressed with that project. I also read Space God, which I liked. That wasn't as much my kind of in my wheelhouse in terms of topic and area of interest, but I still really liked it. And I've followed him off and on with his podcast Spiritually Incorrect, which I recommend. And just in general found him to be an interesting guy. He is a philosophically trained thinker. He's very funny and very honest and very interested in communicating classical Christian ideas in a way that resonates with, I think, younger people today and my generation and lower and younger. So I really, really like his spirit, his approach. I've appreciated him, and I'm really interested to see what he continues to do. So I was interested in this project mostly because I have some connection to him, and I've respected and appreciated his previous work. And so my sense in going into this book was that this was going to be his attempt to pose kind of a full picture of what Christianity is, with a little bit of, his signature kind of cocktail of humor and reflection and honesty, and try to talk about it in a way that'd be of interest to young people. So I was really, really intrigued to see what he would do with this. So that's a little bit about the author. He's currently a professor of religion at the University of Jamestown. So he is an academic. He also studied at Cambridge before that, and has had academic postings at a few different places. That's a little bit about him. And now the main idea of Journey to God, this is one of those books, of which there are many. There are a lot of books that try to do this, which is take the meta-narrative of Scripture, so to speak, the story of Scripture and the big doctrines and ideas and pillars of Christian thought, and put them in sort of a narrative movement framework so that you can get the whole sweep and get the core ideas of Christianity all in kind of a quasi-narrative story form. So there are a lot of books that have done this. There are a lot of books that and projects that boil Christianity or the Scripture, the Bible, down to movements like creation, fall, redemption, so and different permutations of those kinds of movements, different chapters. So this is a book that is doing that, but he's posing it in 6 chapters as opposed to 3 or 4 or whatever. And it is the meta-narrative of Scripture, but it's also a lot of different ideas, which I'll talk about that as I move through the review. There's definitely philosophy behind this project. This is not just a presentation of the biblical story. It's that combined with some autobiography and self-reflection and a lot of philosophy and a lot of apologetics types of questions. So anyways, I'm dancing around what's actually in the book, but let me just step through the 6 movements briefly, and I'll comment more on my reaction to this at the very end of the review. But the 6 movements that Lyonhart identifies, some of which are very common in these types of projects and some of which aren't, are 1, creation; 2, fall, very common, those first 2; 3, nation; 4, redemption; 5, church; 6, end. So he steps you through those 6 movements. There is a lot of discussion of scriptures as it relates to each movement, and then there's a lot of, under each movement, there's, there will be anywhere from 3 to 6 sub-chapters that are very short. Most of the chapters are quite short, where he discusses a theme underneath that broader movement and kind of what is distinctively Christian about it, how it might compare to other thought systems, his own experiences with it, and then how it kind of fits cohesively into the whole movement of God, journey of God, so to speak, that he's putting forward. So the reader of this book gets a full arc of moving through all those themes and sub-themes with a little bit of his kind of signature flair to it. So that's what Journey of God is about. Now, the research behind this is, there's a couple things going on. This is not I would not say this is a research-heavy book. he weaves in a lot of ideas from a wide variety of sources. I mean, he quotes everyone from Heidegger to Brene Brown to Martin Luther King to James Cone, and he also quotes a lot of current events, news articles, essays that are prominent, talks or speeches that are prominent. So this is it's very seeking to be conversant with kind of our current zeitgeist, the cultural air that we're all breathing. So it is referencing a lot of that stuff, as well as deep philosophical ideas and thinkers, as well of course scripture and classical theology. So you get a lot of wrestling with the problem of evil, where does sin come from? You get questions of justice and the goodness of God. There's a lot of discussion of beauty and goodness itself and being itself. All of these things are in the stew of this book. So there's a lot going on, but it's not research heavy. I'm the kind of person that likes to read the footnotes or the endnotes as I'm going through, and I didn't find myself relying too much on those as I was going through this. I would put this more on the approachable end when it comes to research. But the last thing I'll say about the research is he is someone who knows the philosophy that's behind the stuff he's discussing. He does know it. You can just, I don't know. Well, I feel like I can tell when I read someone who's citing philosophers that it just feels like they're cherry picking well-known quotes, but they aren't actually fluent in the ideas. And this does not feel like that. That's the best way I can put it. It's just kind of an intuitive sense. When you're reading a book, you can tell if someone's actually worked with the ideas that they're talking about or not, and it feels like Lyonhart does get the ideas. So I appreciate that a lot. That really puts me at ease when I'm reading a book like this that is seeking to have some sort of an apologetic kind of function or edge to it. So he knows the philosophy. He knows especially classical ideas, classical Trinitarian ideas, for example, Greco-Roman ideas that are even kind of antiquated beyond or from antiquity, I mean, as well as current day philosophy that's post Heidegger and all that stuff. So yeah, wide range, pulling on a wide range of sources, but it's good. And then the readability. So the readability for me is what really, there's a couple things that set this apart that I'll talk about in the reaction, but the readability is one that really does set this one apart in a few key ways. First of all, the book is shockingly funny. On the first page, there is a paragraph, literally on the first page, that had me laughing out loud while I was reading it, and I went to the other room and read it out loud to my wife, who also started laughing out loud. Now, it's not like that doesn't happen, it's not like this is an uproarious laugh out loud book every page after page after page, but that first page just hit me with some really hilarious things, and he does have a funny sense about him, and he reflects on things in a very witty, comedic way. He also does it in a very self-deprecating, self-effacing kind of way, which has a charm to it. I think there's just something, self-effacing that, but in a kind of winsome, quirky way about his style, especially the self-reflective, autobiographical stuff in this book. That's very, very appealing. And he's not someone who grew up as a Christian, and he reflects on that quite honestly throughout the book. He's also very honest about some of the challenges to Christian thinking and Christian faith, especially when it comes to matters of justice or violence or the goodness of God in the face of that stuff. And he threads the humor in here in a way that's not overbearing. It's not too much, but it's just adds a flair and a seasoning to the book, to mix my metaphors a bit, that is I just really like it. It put a smile on my face many times as I was reading through it. So that's one thing that sets the readability apart. Also, it is the style is very kind of snappy and somewhat conversational. The chapters are quite short, and each chapter there's a very clear sub-theme to each chapter underneath each of those 6 big movements that he's going through. So you can very kind of clearly locate yourself within the arc of the whole project. And so I just found this as a reading experience, stylistically, it's very delightful. It's very thoughtful. It's very funny. It's also, honestly, quite beautiful at points. And I actually wanted to read one passage that really struck me in this way. And this is also a little bit surprising about this book. But in the chapter titled Beauty in the Promised Land, in which he's reflecting on the concept of beauty itself and the place it plays in Christian thinking and Christian theology, he has this paragraph that really struck me. He says, this is page 95, "Yet if all the world is a flirtation, then things really get going once we dare glance straight into the eyes of God and strike up the conversation more directly. If God is beauty itself, then the closer we are to God, the more we're enraptured, enticed, enthralled, seduced. Which is why many have read the love poetry of Song of Songs not only as a literal tale of two human lovers, but as a metaphor for God's relationship with humanity. The one who is being is also bliss, and in him we find our state of blissful being. Realizing this, we begin to near death like a wedding day, when the long engagement finally results in full intimacy with the divine. The closer we get in anticipation, the more tastes abound, colors swirl, trees sway, and hold hands in the wind, sex arouses up to heaven, prayers begin to dance like poems and resound like songs, all orchestrated to the messy hum of creation. Standing in the presence of such beauty, and feeling bowed down and small before it, comes closest to what I think may be meant by worship. Really like that passage, and there's passages like that that are sprinkled throughout the book. So he moves from philosophical reflection to autobiographical reflection to something comedic and witty to something about scripture to a stirring passage like that, and it's really a combination of all the above, and all of these pieces are brought together in this very interesting combination of factors of a book. And so that leads me finally to my last reflection here on my reactions as a whole. You can probably tell by now I really liked this book a lot. I think in terms of his books, I think I still love Monotheism the most, but maybe that's just because it was the first one I read by him, and it kind of blew my mind in terms of the creativity of what he was doing there. But I really like this one, and there's a few things I specifically like about it that I'll comment on here. So I already mentioned the humor, I already mentioned the style. I'm not going to linger on that point, although I really like those things about it. One specific thing I really like about this, in comparison to a lot of other books that do this like movement, story, narrative of God and scriptures framework, one thing I like about this one is not only that he included that nation as the third movement, which is effectively the story of Israel, in what Christians call the Old Testament. Like, he included a pretty robust section on that, which honestly many frameworks kind of outright skip. They'll go creation, fall, redemption, tell the story of how things were created, talk about how sin is introduced to the world, and then jump right to Jesus and the redemption of all that stuff, and miss this huge amount of scriptures and theology and reflection. So I'm really grateful he included that, and that speaks to the thoughtfulness of what he's trying to do here. So not only did that he included that section, but also what he did with that section I really, really liked. So that passage I just read on beauty is it's in the Old Testament section. So he discusses concepts like beauty and justice and reflecting on those things and goodness in the section of the Old Testament story, which I think is brilliant. I think it's very well sourced in our scriptures, and I think it really buttresses his whole arc that he's building out here, because you get a deeper introduction to those ideas and those themes in what we call the Old Testament, which we so often gloss over, but it sets you up to understand Christianity as incorporating and including those things from the very beginning in a pretty deep way. And so when you get to the redemption of things, you already have thought about beauty and reflected on goodness and reflected on deeply on justice and how the law, was pointing people to that all the time, and that was a good thing. So anyways, I really, that's something very striking about this book, in addition to the stylistic kind of specificity of what he's doing here, that I really appreciated. I could critique and quibble with small choices, like I think there are ways he talks about justice in the chapter on the cross that I might have massaged the language differently if it were me writing or editing, for example. And there are creative choices I might have done differently. There are certain theological issues I might have wished for more emphasis on than others. But all of those things, for me, are very secondary questions and quibbles. And for me, they did not cause any angst or wrestling with what he's doing in this book as a whole, which I so appreciate and find so refreshing, honestly. So okay. Last couple thoughts is, for me, so as someone who's read a lot of biblical narrative theology and a lot of different apologetics books, and I've definitely read a lot of different approaches to this movement chapter arc framework to the story of Scripture. I've read enough of that I'm kind of a little tired of all the approaches. I've kind of seen all the common threads. For me, this is not a book that it didn't blow my mind in introducing any like wildly new ideas or anything like that. It wasn't a paradigm shifting read for me, but I found it so refreshing and winsome and clever and thoughtful and self-reflective and really pretty unique. I don't know of any other book that puts together such different styles and ideas and in such an interesting, creative way. I reviewed the book The Paradise King last year on this channel, which I love that book, and it's doing something adjacent to this in that it's trying to reintroduce people to the story of Scripture, and it does that in a super creative way that's very stylistically different from this. And I kept thinking about that book because I think these are both books that are trying to introduce people to old ideas in refreshing and exciting and interesting ways. JD Lyonhart's getting at it from a really different angle than The Paradise King is. He's getting at it from this angle of all the things I already talked about: self-deprecating humor, winsome reflections, really thoughtful integration of philosophy and scripture and history of theology, all kind of bundled together. And he even will change, like there's one chapter that's written in kind of like a screenplay, like a dialogue back and forth. He moves into poetry in and out. There's all kinds of creative choices that makes this book a little bit hard to categorize, but I like it for all of that. I like it for all of that quite a lot. And I think, last thing I'll say about this book is that I think this would be a great book to take some people through who are relatively unacquainted with what Christianity presents about who God is and the purposes of redemption and even the story of scriptures as a whole. This is going to go on my short list of recommendations for that kind of small group study, or just handing a book to someone who might be considering Christian faith, considering it anew, or even just trying to get a refreshing kind of reset on a lot of these basic ideas. I think this is going to be on my list, my short list for that, because of the number of themes that he goes into and because of the thoughtful way he structures those movements, and just because it's so dang funny and likable. You just get a sense of, like, as you're reading this, you get a sense of, like, I like this guy who's writing this book. And so, yeah, there you go. Those are my thoughts on the new book, The Journey of God by JD Lyonhart and IVP. Very grateful for the chance to read it and review it. So I hope that you found something of interest here in this discussion. As always, thanks for taking a few minutes to watch.